The judge thought she was just a mouthpiece. Minutes later, he was in handcuffs. Karoline Leavitt stepped into the courtroom with steady heels and sharper eyes. At just 27, she wasn't here to take notes. She was here representing the Trump administration in a high-stakes corruption case, and she came ready. Her presence commanded the room, not through age or experience, but through focus, precision, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Across the aisle sat real estate tycoon Charles Denning, 62, a man who'd built an empire on backroom deals and political favors. He wore a custom Navy suit and a smug expression, thinking the courtroom belonged to him. The man on the bench, Judge Howard Gates, 59, made no effort to hide his skepticism. Gates had been on the bench for decades, known for his scathing tone and deep ties to the state's power brokers. He looked at Karoline the way some people look at spilled coffee, annoyed and dismissive. From the gallery, reporters scribbled, jurors fidgeted, and the air thickened with anticipation. This wasn't just another trial. This was a showdown. A whisper from the hallway. Attorney General Pam Bondi is monitoring the case. Karoline knew Bondi had her back, and if things went sideways, backup would arrive fast. Then came the judge's first words, cold, cutting. "This is a courtroom, not a press room. What is someone like you doing here?" What happened next would leave the country stunned and Judge Gates in cuffs. More than justice was about to be served. Karoline didn't flinch. The courtroom had fallen into a brief hush after Judge Gates delivered his line, sharp, dismissive, and soaked in condescension. "This is a courtroom, not a press room." Behind her, someone chuckled under their breath, probably Denning's lawyer. Karoline didn't look back. Her hand moved slowly, purposefully, to the stack of documents in front of her. Contracts, statements, ledgers, and evidence no one was supposed to find. She stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm here today representing the executive branch with full support from the Department of Justice. I'm not here to speculate. I'm here to present proof that Mr. Denning funneled millions in public infrastructure funds into personal accounts through shell contracts and forged approvals." Her voice cut through the tension, clear, steady, controlled. Charles Denning didn't seem rattled. He leaned back in his chair like he was watching a bad movie. His lawyer, Grant Ellison, mid-50s, slick gray suit, Harvard-class ring, wore a smirk that screamed confidence. But something flickered in his eyes as Karoline laid the first document on the table. "This," she said, tapping the top page, "is a wire transfer. $5 million. Public money. Approved for community redevelopment on the east side, but instead it was redirected to an account in the Cayman Islands under the name of a company that doesn't exist on any business registry." Judge Gates leaned forward. "Financial records," he said, his tone measured but skeptical. "Miss Leavitt, I've seen thousands of them over the years. They can mean anything. What makes you think this is different?" Karoline lifted another sheet. "Because the listed contractor, Midline Solutions, doesn't exist. The address leads to a vacant warehouse in Baltimore, and because the approval signature belongs to someone who hasn't worked for the Planning Commission in over 3 years." Murmurs stirred from the gallery. One juror shifted in their seat, brow furrowed. Another scribbled a note. A reporter in the back leaned forward, phone recording silently from his lap. Gates tapped his fingers against the bench. "I expect you to proceed carefully. Fraud is a serious accusation. You'll need more than a name on paper." Karoline nodded. "I understand, Your Honor, which is why I've brought more than a name." She pulled the next document from the stack, unfolding it carefully. "Here is a contract between Denning's company, DCI Holdings, and a supposed subcontractor. It's marked as a construction agreement for sidewalk repairs. The project budget was listed at $1.2 million, but the ledger shows $3.4 million was transferred, nearly triple, with no line item justification." Judge Gates arched an eyebrow. "Are you saying that amount was stolen?" Karoline didn't blink. "I'm saying it vanished into a private account within 72 hours of the city's approval." Grant Ellison stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. Miss Leavitt is assuming motive and making unfounded claims. Gates didn't look at him. Sit down, Mr. Ellison. I'll determine what qualifies as unfounded. Ellison sat. His confidence had slipped just a notch. Karoline continued. The financial records match up with emails recovered by DOJ investigators. In one, Mr. Denning instructs a project manager to push the funds through before the audit schedule lands. The audit was canceled 2 weeks later. She paused, letting that sink in. Gates crossed his arms. His tone dropped. I hope for your sake those emails are legally obtained. Karoline didn't hesitate. All documents and communications were acquired through proper channels. DOJ warrants are on file. The evidence has been reviewed for authenticity by internal counsel. Gates nodded slowly as if weighing his next words. Very well, proceed. Karoline pulled out one last item, thicker, heavier than the others. This, she said, lifting a contract marked with a red tab, is what changed everything. A signed subcontract for an Eastside housing initiative that never broke ground. $3 million were moved through this contract to a consulting firm with no employees and no tax ID. She flipped to the final page. This signature is key. She held it up not to the judge, but to the courtroom itself. Reporters leaned forward. Jurors narrowed their eyes. Denning's jaw tightened. Gates adjusted his glasses. Whose signature is it? Karoline hesitated for the first time. Not from fear, but precision. Let's come back to that. Gates frowned. Miss Leavitt, this court expects transparency. She nodded. And I'll provide it, but I'd like to submit this contract alongside a matching bank transaction document verified by the DOJ before I speak to the signature's origin. He tapped his gavel once. You're on thin ice, counselor, but proceed. Karoline placed the documents on the evidence table, then walked back to her seat. Denning turned to his lawyer, whispering something. Ellison leaned in, face tight. Whatever Karoline had just laid down, he knew it wasn't bluff. Gates scanned the pages slowly. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The DOJ confirms this signature? He asked. Karoline answered calmly. Yes, Your Honor. The bank records include digital authentication and location metadata. Silence followed. Heavy, dense. Gates set the papers down. I'd like a recess to examine this further. Karoline stepped forward. Before you call for a recess, Your Honor, I respectfully request 1 more minute. He stared at her, then nodded. She turned, walked to the clerk's desk, and retrieved a sealed envelope. This, she said, holding it up, is a transcript from a monitored call between Charles Denning and an unidentified senior official. It was obtained via lawful surveillance by the Justice Department. The official mentions needing to suppress financial records before they end up in Leavitt's hands. Gasps rippled through the room. Grant Ellison stood again. Your Honor, this recording is new material. We've not been allowed to verify. Gates raised his hand. Enough. His voice was flat, hard. Karoline stepped forward again, her voice low, precise. The transcript was timestamped 2 days before I received an anonymous tip. The voice on that call matches someone in this room. All eyes swung toward the bench. Gates didn't move. Karoline continued. The DOJ's audio lab confirmed the voice, and the official referenced not only the housing initiative but the exact contract ID I just submitted. Gates's hand tightened around the gavel. You're playing a dangerous game. Karoline's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I'm not playing anything, Your Honor. I'm following the truth wherever it leads. He stared her down, then glanced toward the court clerk. Schedule an evidentiary hearing and have DOJ forensic analysts ready to testify on the voice match. Karoline took her seat. She could feel the tide shifting. Jurors whispered. Reporters texted. Denning wiped sweat from his brow. The first domino had fallen, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't done yet. If this video entertained you, share it with a friend right now. Don't keep the fun to yourself. The courtroom didn't breathe. For a long moment, the weight of Karoline Leavitt's last sentence lingered in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. Across the aisle, Charles Denning leaned forward, elbows on the defense table, his confident smirk long gone. His lawyer, Grant Ellison, no longer met her eyes. Judge Howard Gates sat still on the bench. His fingers hovered just above the gavel, but he didn't move. His expression unreadable, carved from years of legal stoicism. Yet there was something in the tightness of his jaw, the flicker behind his eyes, that betrayed him. He wasn't just offended, he was afraid. Karoline sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, her hands gently resting over the now-open transcript folder. Her posture said calm, her eyes said war. Outside the windows, the mid-morning light filtered in through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Inside, silence was giving way to something else, pressure, the kind that bends people, the kind that breaks them. Judge Gates finally cleared his throat. "This court," he began, voice slower now, "acknowledges the gravity of the materials presented. The alleged involvement of a senior official in a criminal enterprise is not taken lightly." He looked directly at Karoline. "But before we accept such evidence into the record, I want confirmation from the Justice Department's Forensic Division by the end of the day." Karoline nodded once. "Already requested, Your Honor." Then she added, "The voice print analysis was expedited after the DOJ received the call logs, because someone within this building tried to have them deleted." Another ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery. Ellison stood again. "This is outrageous. She's attempting to poison the well before any ruling is made." Karoline turned to him, cool and steady. "What I'm doing is laying out what your client didn't expect anyone to find." Gates raised his hand again. "Enough." Then to Ellison, "You'll have your moment during cross-examination." Then back to Karoline. "You mentioned earlier that the contract contained a signature." Her eyes didn't leave his. "Yes, Your Honor." "Have you identified it?" "I have." "Is it someone currently holding public office?" "Yes." "Is it someone within this courtroom?" A pause. Karoline's voice came clear and strong. "Yes." That was the moment everything tilted. The gallery gasped again. One juror, the man with salt and pepper hair in the back row, put his pen down and folded his hands in front of him like he was preparing to pray. A young woman on the front row, red nails, navy jacket, pressed her hand to her mouth. Denning sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the bench. Karoline flipped the document back to the signature page and walked it to the evidence table. She didn't lift it, didn't wave it, didn't perform. She just set it down, gently with intention, and turned it so the signature faced the bench. Gates didn't lean forward. He didn't need to. He could already feel it. "This," she said softly now, "is your signature, Your Honor." Time cracked open. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Not a muscle, not a breath. Then, slowly, Gates leaned forward and peered down at the document. His eyes locked on the signature. Black ink, looped initials. A date, 3 months prior. Right before the contract approval was rushed through. Gates swallowed hard. His voice came quieter this time, but sharp. "You're accusing a sitting judge of collusion in a fraudulent transfer of public funds," Karoline replied without blinking. "I'm not accusing. I'm presenting verified documentation that links your signature to an illegal contract used to funnel taxpayer dollars into Charles Denning's private account." Gates gripped the bench with both hands. "There are protocols. If you believe there's misconduct, you follow proper channels." Karoline leaned in. "The channels don't work when the gatekeeper is the one behind the lock." Ellison stood again, louder this time. "This has gone far enough." Karoline's voice rose just enough to override his. "The people have a right to know who's protecting corruption from the bench. That's not political. That's not personal. That's justice." Gates struck the gavel once, sharp, forceful. "Order." He tried to regain control, but the courtroom was slipping through his fingers. Reporters were texting nonstop. A camera flash popped from someone's coat sleeve. Jurors looked shaken. Denning had gone pale. His lawyer was sweating through his tailored shirt. Karoline turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have one more item. A call recording, lawfully obtained. Voice confirmed by DOJ. It ties your voice to an attempt to obstruct this very investigation. Gates slammed the gavel again. You will not play a recording in my courtroom without full verification. She didn't back off. Then I asked the court's permission to submit the transcript into evidence until the DOJ verifies the audio. He stared her down. She stared right back. Then a quiet voice from the jury box broke the tension. The woman in the navy jacket. Let her play it. Gates blinked. Jurors are not to make requests. The salt and pepper-haired man spoke up next. You always said truth matters in this court. Let's hear it. The gallery murmured louder now. Karoline took a breath. Gates's hands trembled slightly, his jaw clenched. Finally he spoke, voice hollowed by pressure. You'll submit the transcript, and the recording will be reviewed in chambers. Karoline gave a small nod, then motioned for the court clerk. She handed over the sealed transcript and the clerk walked it slowly up to the bench. Gates didn't open it right away. He just stared at the envelope like it might burn his hands. Ellison stood again, voice rattled. We move for a dismissal on the grounds of judicial conflict. Karoline cut in, louder now. The moment Judge Gates signs a recusal, I'll support a motion to continue. Until then, this court is still in session, and so is the truth. Reporters typed faster. Jurors whispered openly now. The clerk sat back down, visibly shaken. One of the Justice Department observers in the back quietly stepped out, likely to make a call. The walls were cracking, the bench was crumbling, and Karoline wasn't done. She returned to her seat, picked up a final document from her folder and placed it gently next to the transcript, a photograph, a scanned check, signed by Judge Howard Gates, dated the same day as the illegal transfer, made out to a consulting firm that never consulted on anything. Karoline let it rest on the table, waiting. She didn't need to speak anymore. The next move wasn't hers. The next move belonged to the system. Gates sat frozen. Denning dropped his head into his hands. The jury didn't need instructions. They'd already seen enough. But the story wasn't over, because behind the double courtroom doors, footsteps echoed. 2 pairs, measured, heavy, intentional. And Pam Bondi was about to walk in. The doors burst open before the gavel could fall again. Every head turned at once. Pam Bondi entered like a storm with purpose. Black suit sharp, blonde hair pinned back, no hesitation in her stride. She didn't have to announce herself. The entire courtroom knew who she was. The weight of her title followed her in. United States Attorney General. 2 Justice Department officers flanked her, silent, serious, steady. Karoline didn't move. She had expected this moment, counted on it. Judge Gates froze. His lips parted like he was about to speak, but the words never came. His hands were still wrapped tightly around the gavel, knuckles pale, veins raised, as if he thought he could still command the room. But Bondi had already taken it. She stood at the center of the aisle, voice low but commanding enough to cut through marble and steel. Judge Howard Gates, under the authority of the United States Department of Justice, you are under investigation for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of judicial power. Gasps erupted like shattering glass. Karoline kept her eyes locked on the bench. She didn't blink, didn't smile, just watched. Gates finally spoke, his voice brittle. You're interrupting a live trial, Miss Bondi. Pam's eyes were cold. This trial has already been compromised by your hand. What I'm doing is correcting it. Ellison jumped to his feet. Your Honor, I object to this entire circus. Sit down, Bondi said, without even turning toward him. The officer closest to Ellison stepped slightly forward, just enough to make the message clear. Judge Gates tried again, his voice louder now, angling for control. This court demands due process. You can't just walk in and... Karoline stood up. The room went quiet again. She didn't look at Gates. She looked at the clerk. Sir, if you would please activate the playback device. The clerk hesitated. He looked to Gates. Gates didn't nod, but he didn't stop it either. A soft click, then static, then the faint hum of a recorded line, then came the voice, deep, familiar, unmistakable. Don't let her find those contracts. If she gets the documents, they disappear. I don't care how. A collective gasp swept across the courtroom. Someone whispered, "That's him." A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. A juror reached for the edge of their seat like they might fall off. Gates sat still, frozen. The recording continued. "If Denning gets exposed, I get exposed. If the DOJ sniffs around, we stall the audit. Say it's technical, say it's delayed. We just need a few more weeks to move the rest of it." The voice was clear, cold, calculating, and undeniably that of Judge Howard Gates. Karoline didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The courtroom had already heard the truth for themselves. Gates gripped the bench, his hands shaking now. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His lips moved, then stopped. His chest rose and fell like he'd just been punched in the ribs. Pam Bondi stepped forward, removing a folded document from her blazer. "Here is the verified DOJ transcript. Here is the signed order for review. And here," she turned to the officers, "is the moment." The first officer stepped to the bench. Gates stood abruptly, voice strained. "This is illegal! This is unconstitutional! I demand this be taken under review." Bondi stepped forward, eyes never leaving his. "You signed off on millions in public theft. You obstructed an active investigation. You tried to suppress federal evidence. And now, Judge Gates." She paused. The courtroom was dead silent. "You no longer have the authority to demand anything." She gave the nod. The handcuffs clicked open in the officer's hands. Gates recoiled, eyes wide, voice trembling now. "You're making a mistake. You're ruining everything." The officer grasped his wrist. "No," Karoline said softly. "You did that yourself." The cuffs closed around his wrists with a metallic snap that echoed through the courtroom like a verdict. Gates was no longer the judge. He was the accused. He stumbled as the officers pulled him from the bench. The black robe bunched around his shoulders like a costume too heavy to wear now. Jurors watched with wide eyes. Reporters typed frantically. Phones were held high, flashes bursting, capturing the fall of a man who thought he was untouchable. Ellison stood frozen at the defense table. Denning leaned over, whispering frantically in his ear. Pam turned toward them, voice cutting. "Mr. Denning will speak shortly. You're next." Denning's face turned a sickly shade of white. The officers led Gates down the center aisle, head bowed, mouth clamped shut. Someone in the gallery began clapping, a single person, then another, then a few more. Not a cheer, not a celebration, just a slow, solemn sound of reckoning. Karoline sat down, her body still, her mind buzzing. She had done what few dared even to attempt, exposed the rot, on record, in public, in the heart of the system that had tried to bury it. Bondi walked to her, calm and composed. She leaned down slightly. "You made history today." Karoline gave a small nod. "You finished it." "No," Bondi said, straightening. "We just started." She turned back to the courtroom. "This trial is suspended until a new judge is appointed. The Justice Department will take over all submitted evidence. Every name tied to this fraud will be investigated." Then, turning toward Denning, "You might want to prepare for your moment." Denning said nothing, but the sweat on his brow said everything. Bondi walked out the same way she came in, commanding, unshaken, unstoppable. The officers followed, dragging the fall of power behind them. Karoline remained behind, at the plaintiff's table, alone, but victorious. And somewhere in the silence, the public's faith had started to stir again. The door had barely swung shut behind Judge Gates when the murmurs erupted into a storm. The courtroom was no longer a place of order. It had become a crucible, a space where truth had burned through authority like fire through dry wood. Reporters surged forward to the rail, voices low but frantic, fingers racing over phone screens, uploading the footage of Gates being cuffed on the bench. A juror stood up without realizing it, one hand pressed against her heart. Others looked around at each other, wide-eyed, stunned, some even angry they'd nearly been made pawns in a corrupted trial. The facade had cracked, and no one was going to forget what they'd just witnessed. Karoline Leavitt stood still at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly, her documents aligned beside her. She didn't need to do anything more. The moment had spoken louder than words. Charles Denning looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. The man who'd walked in that morning radiating arrogance now sat hunched forward, elbows on the defense table, his breath shallow and uneven. His lawyer, Grant Ellison, had gone pale. His hand clutched a notepad, but he hadn't written a word since the audio played. Denning leaned over and whispered, but Ellison didn't respond. Then Denning snapped. He stood, not defiantly, desperately. His voice cracked as he shouted across the courtroom, "I'll cooperate. I'll talk, I swear. I didn't know it would go this far. Just tell them, I'll give names." A silence hit the room, heavy and sharp. Karoline didn't react. Pam Bondi, who had just re-entered the room to gather final documentation, turned slowly. Her heels echoed on the marble floor as she walked forward again. She stopped halfway down the aisle, eyes fixed on Denning. She didn't shout. She didn't scold. She just asked, "Why now?" Denning hesitated, blinking fast. "Because I didn't know they'd arrest him. I thought it'd just pass." Bondi stepped forward another pace. "And when you funneled public housing money into offshore accounts, did you think that would pass too?" Denning lowered his head. "I was told it was clean, that no one would look too closely." Bondi nodded, slow and cold. "They always tell you that, until someone does look." Karoline finally stood, her voice low and precise. "Mr. Denning, you had your chance to come clean, before the DOJ got involved, before Judge Gates signed off on a fraudulent contract with your name at the bottom." Denning's hands trembled now. "Please," he whispered. "I have a list. There are others. People in state commissions, a few mayors. I'll give it up. Everything. Just help me." Bondi's eyes didn't soften. "Hand it over," she said, "and we'll verify it. But understand something. Cooperation doesn't erase consequences." Ellison sat slumped beside him. His face was blank now, as if something inside him had shut down. Karoline walked over to the evidence table, placed a manila folder down gently. Inside, bank statements, email logs, and a second signature that hadn't yet been revealed. She didn't speak. She just let it sit there like the next domino. The courtroom buzzed again. Reporters whispered, recording every move. Jurors sat silent but riveted. One of them whispered to another, "She's not just a press secretary, she's a force." Outside, the noise was growing. Word had already spread beyond the courthouse. Crowds were beginning to gather on the steps, holding up phones, waving flags, and shouting for justice. Some were live streaming, others holding signs that read things like "Clean the Bench" and "Leavitt Bondi." Inside, Karoline and Pam spoke quietly near the bench, now empty and abandoned like a fallen throne. Bondi leaned in. "You handled that flawlessly." Karoline gave a subtle nod. "You timed it perfectly." "We don't play games with men like that," Bondi replied. "We show up when the world's watching." They looked toward Denning, now seated again, shoulders caved, head down. Karoline spoke softly. "He's unraveling." "Good," Bondi said. "Let him. He thought the courtroom was his stage. Turns out it was his confession booth." Bondi turned to the clerk. "Proceed with formal recess. The Department of Justice will take control of the case files and court records until a new federal judge is appointed." The clerk, still visibly shaken, nodded quickly. Pam turned back to Karoline. "We'll debrief at DOJ tomorrow, first thing." Karoline nodded. 7 a.m.? "Be earlier," Bondi said with a faint grin. "This story's not done." She gave Karoline a small, firm pat on the shoulder. Then, turning to the gallery, Bondi raised her voice. This courtroom is adjourned, but the investigation continues. No name is off limits. The words hung like a final judgment. As Bondi walked out for the last time that day, the energy in the room shifted again. Not chaos, not shock. Momentum. Karoline gathered her documents, her movements calm, methodical. As she closed her folder, the clerk approached. His voice was trembling. Miss Leavitt, do you want me to record anything else? Karoline gave a small, tired smile. No, she said. Just write it exactly as it happened. He nodded, returning to his desk, still wide-eyed. As Karoline walked toward the exit, she passed by Denning. He didn't look up, but his voice came out small and defeated. Will they come for me tonight? She didn't stop walking. They're already here. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped out into the light. The crowd erupted, phones raised, people cheering, voices shouting her name and Bondi's. One woman in a red coat shouted, "That's what justice looks like," and others echoed her. A teenage boy held up a handwritten sign, Karoline Leavitt, voice of a new era. She didn't wave, she didn't pose. She just kept walking, her heels tapping down the stone steps, straight toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. The door opened. The DOJ agent inside gave her a respectful nod. She climbed in, closed the door. For the first time all day, silence wrapped around her like a blanket. Outside, the crowd kept growing. But inside, Karoline leaned her head back against the seat. She had just torn down a lie that had stood for years, and it wasn't over. Not yet. The SUV moved slowly through a growing wave of people outside the courthouse. A crowd had gathered like a dam finally breaking, phones in the air, voices rising not in protest but in something rare and electric, belief. Some shouted her name, others simply chanted justice. A middle-aged woman in a red coat raised a sign. Thank you, Karoline and Bondi. A college student nearby held up his phone on a live stream titled, The Day the System Flinched. Inside the vehicle, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly, watching it all behind tinted glass. The sunlight caught her face as it shifted between exhaustion and quiet resolve. She had barely spoken a word since leaving the courtroom, but she didn't need to. The facts had done the talking, and the country had heard them loud and clear. Pam Bondi had already pulled away in a second vehicle, off to secure the next legal steps. Their plan had been airtight, their execution precise, and now their names were trending across the country, not as politicians but as protectors of truth. Her phone buzzed, again and again. She unlocked it briefly, scanning the flood of messages. Leavitt Bondi was climbing past 500,000 mentions. Breaking. Judge Howard Gates arrested in courtroom. DOJ confirms. More names expected from Denning's cooperation. One post stood out at the top of her feed. A photo taken just minutes ago. Karoline standing motionless at the plaintiff's table while Gates was led away in cuffs. The caption read, "The system bent today." But it didn't break, because she didn't. She put the phone away. Let the wave of praise wash past her for now. This wasn't over, not yet. There were still names on Denning's list, still shadows hiding behind courtroom doors and city offices, still hands in pockets that didn't belong to them. The SUV pulled into her neighborhood just outside D.C., the kind with neat sidewalks and kids' bikes resting against porch rails. The engine stopped in front of her modest home where warm yellow light spilled from the living room window. She stepped out slowly, walking up the short path to her door. Inside, her mother was waiting, Ellen Leavitt, silver-haired, sturdy, and smiling, though her eyes were red. In the living room, Karoline's 9-month-old son bounced in a soft chair, squealing happily at the TV. "Karoline," Ellen said softly, pulling her daughter into a hug. "He's been pointing at the screen every time they say your name." Karoline laughed gently, kissing the top of her son's head. "Has he been good?" "He's a dream, but you were something else today." Karoline sank into the couch, finally letting her heels slip off. I wasn't sure how it would play out. But you were ready, her mother said, sitting beside her. You always are. Just like when you were 10, standing up to that school board. Karoline smiled. Feels like that all over again. But bigger. Her son squealed again, waving his arms. She picked him up and cradled him close. He's why I do this, so he doesn't grow up thinking corruption is just how things work. Ellen brushed hair from Karoline's face. You showed the country that it doesn't have to be. That night, after her son had drifted off to sleep and the news kept cycling clips of Gates's arrest, Karoline sat in her small home office scrolling through social media. Her face appeared in videos from every angle, standing tall, speaking calmly, watching as justice caught up to power. Comment sections were overflowing. She didn't raise her voice once, didn't need to. Pam Bondi and Karoline Leavitt, name a better duo. This is how you restore faith in the system. The posts ranged from heartfelt to fiery, but one line repeated over and over. This isn't just a press secretary. This is the future of justice. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Pam. Mitchell's list is longer than we thought. 7 a.m., my office, be ready. Karoline didn't hesitate. She typed back, I'll be there, let's clean house. She put the phone down and walked to the balcony. The spring night air was crisp, cutting through the humidity of the day. Below, the city lights twinkled like secrets waiting to be exposed. Somewhere down there, others like Gates and Denning were watching the news, shifting in their chairs, making calls, wondering if their names were on that list too. They should wonder. Karoline stood quietly in the doorway, a figure carved in resolve. She wasn't in this for the cameras, the applause, or the trending hashtags. She was in this for something that couldn't be quantified in metrics or screen time. She was in it for the kids sleeping down the hallway, for the people who'd stopped trusting headlines, for every voter who'd felt like the game was rigged from the start, and for the idea that justice didn't just belong in law books, it belonged in real life. The door behind her creaked gently as she stepped back inside. She closed it quietly. Tomorrow she'd meet Bondi. Tomorrow they'd dive into Denning's list. And tomorrow someone else in power would find out what happens when you bet against truth and get caught. The people were watching now, and they weren't looking away. The next morning, the sky over Washington, D.C. was soft gray, the kind of quiet cloud cover that muted the noise of the city. But inside the White House, the air was charged. Karoline Leavitt's heels echoed crisply against the polished marble hallway as she made her way past security, staffers nodding at her with subtle reverence. Word had already spread through every floor. She didn't just stand up to a federal judge. She dismantled him in full view of the country. A Marine opened the door to the Oval Office. President Donald J. Trump stood behind the resolute desk, arms crossed, face lit up not with surprise but with pride. There she is, he said loud and clear, the young lady who brought the house down. Karoline offered a professional nod as she stepped in. Good morning, Mr. President. He rounded the desk, clapping her on the shoulder with the warm force of a proud father. Don't give me that formal stuff. You just made history. That courtroom clip? I watched it twice before breakfast. Karoline allowed herself a small smile. I didn't do it alone. Yeah, he said, waving his hand. Pam's a bulldog, but you, Karoline, you were the spark. You looked that judge in the eye and took him apart piece by piece. He gestured for her to sit. She did. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes sharper now. Gates going down? That's big. But you said Mitchell's ready to talk? Karoline nodded. He cracked after the arrest. He offered names, city commissioners, state board members, even 2 federal appointees. Pam's already verifying the list. Trump sat back, nodding slowly. It's worse than we thought. Karoline didn't flinch. That's why I'm here. He stared at her a moment longer, then smiled again, wide and genuine. This is why I picked you. You're not just a press secretary. You're a force. The whole country's watching you now. I know, she said softly. And they should, he added. Because you showed them something yesterday. You showed them the system can work, if the right people are brave enough to push. Caroline's eyes lowered briefly. It's a lot to carry. Trump's voice softened just a touch. Yeah, it is. Then, with his usual certainty, he added, but you're carrying it well. You made Make America Great Again mean something yesterday. You reminded people what justice looks like. He stood again, walking back toward the window. Outside, the White House lawn gleamed with dew, but Caroline's mind was already back in that courtroom, the gavel, the signature, the recording, the arrest. She stood too. I'm not done, sir. Pam and I are following the trail all the way through. Denning's list is just the beginning. Trump turned, a satisfied grin pulling at the edge of his mouth. Good, don't stop. Drag every last one of them into the light. I want every corrupt name exposed, and you've got the full weight of the White House behind you. Caroline nodded. We'll need it. Trump walked her toward the door. Now go get some rest. You earned it, but not too much. Something tells me you're going to need that energy. She laughed, just a little. I'm already thinking about the next steps. I know you are, he said. That's why you're different. As she stepped into the hallway, the doors closed gently behind her. Her phone buzzed before she reached the end of the corridor. Pam Bondi, Denning confirmed the mayor of Eastport and 2 congressional aides. We're pulling records now, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Be sharp. Caroline typed back without hesitation. I'll be there. Let's bring it all down. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. The halls of power felt different now, not because of the decor or the titles, but because yesterday proved that even the most entrenched systems could be shaken if the right hands struck the right chords. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the north lawn. A White House aide met her by the main exit and opened the door. The motorcade was waiting, press stationed across the road like shadows behind cameras, lenses aimed, questions loaded. Caroline paused at the threshold. In that moment, she wasn't just walking out of a meeting. She was stepping further into something much bigger, the eye of a storm she had chosen to stand in. She squared her shoulders and walked into the light. Later that night, long after the reporters had gone quiet and the White House lights had dimmed behind security gates, Karoline Leavitt sat alone on her balcony in suburban Washington, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The city below buzzed with quiet energy, traffic lights blinking in rhythm, the distant hum of life pressing on. But up here there was peace, the kind that only comes after a storm. Inside, her son slept soundly down the hall. A baby monitor blinked softly on the coffee table beside her, a quiet reminder of why she kept going. She picked up her phone again, skimming through the latest headlines. DOJ launches. Expanded probe following Gates' arrest. Leavitt. Bondi still trending. 2 million mentions in 24 hours. Public confidence in justice system sees rare uptick in overnight poll. But it wasn't the metrics that stuck with her. It was a post from a woman in Iowa. Just a photo of her kitchen table, stacks of bills, a laptop with the courtroom footage paused on Caroline's face, and a caption that read, I didn't think people like her existed in government. Maybe I was wrong. Caroline let the words sink in. Maybe that was what this was really about. It wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt judge or exposing the ugly machinery behind men like Denning. It was about restoring the belief, however fragile, that ordinary people could still do extraordinary things when they refused to be silent. It was about reminding the country that justice isn't a performance, it's a responsibility. And sometimes it takes someone young, someone underestimated, someone relentless enough to look power in the eye and say, not today. The text from Pam Bondi still glowed on her lock screen. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., be sharp. Caroline smiled softly. She would be. Because this wasn't a one-time victory, it was the first step in a longer fight. There were still more names to expose, more walls to break, more truth to deliver, no matter how protected the liars thought they were. But for tonight, she allowed herself a breath, a moment of stillness, a quiet win. And as she stood up and stepped inside, closing the balcony door behind her, she whispered something only the night would hear. "We're just getting started." Justice doesn't end here. If you believe no one is above the law, hit that like button, drop a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe because the next name on Denning's list might just change everything.